Good evening once again, everybody. I'm Tom Cook, film professor here at Keene State College in the southwest corner of New Hampshire. You'll probably be hearing about us tomorrow, which is election day. Never quite sure. I've lived here 25 years, why we hold such a fascinating position in the election cycle here in New York, but I guess we're among the first and the earliest ones. But after that, you can ignore us for another 4 years. But don't ignore our class here. These are our webcast seminars on career development in film and media. The students here are mostly juniors and seniors looking to hopefully graduate and get work professionally. And so we spend the semester taking a look at skills that will help them, for want of a better term, sell themselves, learning how to write a good cover letter and a resume, learning how to take an interview, doing the all important elevator pitch, creating a website, a demo reel, things like that. And one of the most important things, and I think one of the most interesting things that the students have found, is that every week we have guests from the film and television industry, many of them graduates. And actually tonight we have one who is both. I'd like to welcome Jennifer Dunnington, a graduate from, I won't necessarily say when, because she's much younger appearing than her graduation date might appear. And so she was one of, certainly one of our most successful graduates. She's worked professionally for quite a while. And what I want to do is introduce Jennifer to you. She'll give you a little bit of a background on her time here at Keene State, what her life was like after graduating, and how she got some of her more successful positions. And then for those of you who've been following us know, we'll open it up to questions to the students and spend an hour with Jennifer Dunnington. Jen, thanks for joining us tonight.
I'm happy to be here.
So tell us about your time, what you recall at Keene State, and how you got out of here, and what obviously the students are interested in. How do you get work?
Yeah, I know that's the number one question. I think that, when I started at Keene State, I think that the film studies major was just beginning. And I always remember the first film class that I took was, and of course, I think I've embellished it in my memory at this point, but I have this vision of being in this bizarre attic space with a light bulb hanging from the ceiling and some kind of a drippy water leak that was that was going on. And I'm sure that it wasn't that bad, but I don't even think they had a space really. So definitely not the building that was there by the time I graduated.
I'll go ahead and spill the beans, and well, it says on your
93.
lower there 93. I got here in 94, and we were in the basement of Parker Hall. It was a cozy little place, but yeah, actually we would have water leaks on the walls dripping down the brick wall. So maybe that's what you've embellished onto it. Since then we've become one of the most popular majors on campus.
I know. It's amazing how it's grown.
And the college has been super supportive of us.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things that I think they've been really good, and our students benefit from that.
Yeah. So even from the time that I was there, because I took that class maybe my sophomore year. And then my junior year, I did a year abroad. And I think in my sophomore year, it was just an elective and it was something I thought was interesting. And then I did it a year abroad and I studied theater and photography. And when I got back, I chose film as a major, which of course my parents were horrified at and thought I would never ever find work. And it was actually amazing because I was so immersed in the film classes because I switched my major quite late. And so I had to go a second year. So I had 2 senior years. And I took classes nonstop and in the summer and it just as much as I could. So it was like boot camp for being a film student. And it was great. I loved it.
Well, and at the time we had very few actual production facilities. I mean, I knew the state when I came here to first work. And so what kind of experience did you have? Because you're, certainly an aesthetic artist, but you work a lot with the technology as well. Where did you get that experience? Was it in college or after graduation?
It was a little bit in college. I remember there was some kind of a Steenbeck,
Yep.
some kind of flatbed somewhere, and I think I remember doing some video work too. So so it was like there was a TV studio.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I can't remember exactly, but I do remember doing some video work in that department. But then was an equipment room, this tiny little closet, and I ran that 1 year or 2 years. And we used to have Paul Barnes from Florentine Films came
Sure.
and taught an editing class. So he invited me to do an internship. And so then between making my own movie or movies and then working up at Florentine, I started to get a lot of experience with, with the flatbeds and all the stuff that goes, along with the film, the
Okay.
physical film.
Can you talk about, I've always found it important for my students who really want to be editors, for them to get at least a semester's worth of uh, grounding in editing actual film. So whether I found it gives them much more of uh, a means of thinking very critically and crucially before you make that cut. I find it so easy, and I love nonlinear editing. But right now, it's so easy if you make a mistake to just click, uh, undo. And I think editing in
Yeah.
a linear fashion teaches you different skills. Would you agree or not?
Oh, definitely, because you have to. It's the same with photography. I mean, what back when we shot everything on film, you really thought about what you were taking a picture of. So you didn't just snap 1,000 pictures, which is a total drag to go through to figure out what you like. It's the same in editing. If you know that when you cut the film, you have to deal with splicing it together, and that you might lose the extension of it, and you just make a conscious effort to think about why you're going to cut it and where you're going to cut it, and not just just try with like you said, being able to undo everything kind of means that you don't spend as much time on the decision.
Sure. And that could be, again, I love non-linear editing, and it's been a boon to any kind of post-production work. But I think it's a different skill. I think we think less, maybe somewhat less critically, which is why, I mean, as you know, Larry and I, in creating the kind of the basis of the new film program, felt it real important to integrate critical studies and the
Mhm.
real conscious thought behind what you're shooting and why you're cutting, those kinds of things. So you did an internship in Florentine your second senior year?
Yes.
Okay. So what about graduation then? What'd you do postgraduate?
I started right on, I got hired by Florentine to work on
Okay.
baseball. So I started as an intern, then I became an apprentice. And then I think when I left, I was still an apprentice. I don't think I was assistant by then. And then my plan was because I have dual citizenship, I have Canadian citizenship, and I was going to move to Toronto. So I was making arrangements and plans to move up there to work in film up there, because there was actually a lot of film work going on
Sure
up there at the
was.
time.
Is.
Well, yeah, not so much anymore,
Well,
but
yeah, not
there was
now.
a lot at that time. I mean, they're still doing a lot of production work, but there was a lot of post work there. And
Okay.
I was I actually had wanted to do cinematography, because I was always really into photography. So when I was, that's what I was hoping to do when I was at Keene State. But then I got all the editing, I got exposed to all the editing side of things at Florentine, and I really enjoyed that. So the people that I worked with were all from New York, because it was such a big job. And at that point, when they did those massive films, they didn't have all the people that were local yet. So the crew moved up to New Hampshire for 2 years, and they moved back to New York, and they invited me to come down, because they said if I moved down, they would find me work, and they could get, I could be their assistant on different projects. So I did, and then I never left. So it's been really great. I mean, at first it was a total shock, because a job up at Florentine in New Hampshire is like a dream job. I mean, it's not like anything you would find anywhere else. Like we would play ice hockey at lunch and sledding parties and, big dinner gatherings together. And, all the while it's like totally professional during the day. We took tap dancing classes together. I mean, we just had a lot of fun together. And then I moved to New York and it was like not that.
Right.
But once I got, acclimated, then I mean, New York's amazing. I love it. So
So with it not being New Hampshire, is it more like the lifestyle pace, or you're talking about the professional work?
well, just that, I mean, there was no ice skating, hockey
Right.
games at lunch. And
Okay.
Walpole's such a tiny little town. And New York is so big, obviously, but it's also, it's a city, so it's just a little more cutthroat. And you just have to, acclimate to that fast pace. And there's a lot of people that are trying to get the same jobs. And so you're competing with more people. And there's a wide range of people. So there's people that are super friendly and there's people that are not so friendly. And it's just acclimating to the bigness of it.
So when you were in school, initially cinematography, your cup of tea, sort of, then going to work and filling a need at Florentine. What was it? Just the availability of the work, or what transitioned your interest into sound/music?
I guess initially it was the availability of the work.
Okay.
But then I don't know. I did really enjoy it, and I really enjoyed the people I was working with. And I kind of always thought that I would, when I first started, I could just still sort of go in any kind of direction, but work was great to get. And it was nice that it was in the film business. And I also did dance at Keene. And so I kind of thought there's this whole little mini genre of dance on film. And so I thought I would do something with that, which I did. But it's, New York's the kind of place where there's always like cool collaborations going on. And, if I had pursued that, I could have done that as well. And I enjoyed it, but I was actually working so often that I didn't really have a lot of time to explore my own thing, which is fine. But and because I was really enjoying the work that I was doing, and learning from the people I was working with and meeting new people. Because back when I first started, there was a huge editing place called Sound One, and that's where the majority of films were done. And so it was kind of like, we used to joke that it was like a college dorm. And there was multiple floors, and you would, there would just be huge people there all the time, big directors, big musicians, producers, actors, because people would be coming in to record their lines for ADR, or they'd be mixing the films. So you would just meet so many people in this building. And that's how I met, that's how I made a ton of connections. So, someone would come in to visit the people that you were working with, and then they would introduce you, and you would all have a conversation. And then, so when you bumped into them at the coffee maker, you could, have your own conversation. And so there's so much about this business that is about connecting with people, and, and those relationships. So obviously you also have to be good at what you do, but there's a lot of people that can do the same job. And so then the next step in hiring someone is, well, what's their personality like? Am I going to be able to deal with this person at 3 a.m. when we're all stuck in the studio ready to kill each other?
Several of our guests had commented on that you can be the most talented person in the world, and if you're just no fun to work with, nobody's going to want to work with you.
Exactly.
So you got to make yourself both valuable and pleasant to be around.
Right.
So you'd consider, this is a loaded question directed for my students, you'd consider connections to be fairly important in getting work?
Yeah, they really are. because the first thing that someone does when they need to hire someone is they email everyone or call and say, do you know anyone, you know, who can do X, Y, and Z? And so, you know, like I always have a folder of resumes that I keep on hand. So, you know, if someone seems, you know, that they would fit the bill for what someone's looking for, then I'll pass the resume on. Or if I can use someone, you know, then I'll go and look if I don't have someone who's like readily right here, and just see if there's anyone that would be appropriate for the job, depending on what it is. But the, you know, the flip side of that is that there's actually, it's really hard to, when I started, there was a lot of positions where you were apprentices, interns, assistants. And now there's not as many. The film crews are much smaller. So they were much bigger when I started, because it was physical film. So you had to, you needed bodies to deal with the you know, the big reels and just the physical part of it. And now it's just, you can just have one person remote just dealing with everybody's files, and it's a much simpler process. It's much more complex in a lot of ways, but it's much simpler in that assistant organizing role. So, and plus the studios are constantly trying to, you know, squeeze every last drop of money out from the post-production budgets. And so we tend to get screwed the most.
There you go. That's probably true. One last question before I've been monopolizing it, before I turn it over to the students. How, what would you have considered your like real big break, and or how did you get to working with Mr. Scorsese?
Well, when I was at Sound One, I was working next door. I was working on a documentary, and I was working next door to someone who was a music editor, who I got to know. Like I said, like he stopped by to see my friends that I was working with, and we got to chatting. And he was looking for a second assistant who was willing to drive an hour north to work with the composer, like to be like the liaison composer, because he didn't want to go that, you know, that 1 hour drive. And I was psyched to get out of the city, so I volunteered to do it. And I played French horn and piano when I was growing up too, so I can read music, and so it wasn't foreign to me, that whole world of it. And that was the composer was Howard Shore, and I just ended up working with him for, I guess it was about almost 20 years.
Don't date yourself.
And it worked out well. And I loved the music editing. I mean, at that point I was an assistant, but eventually I became an editor under him. And it's just, I love the combination of the visual and the music and the movement. And so, yeah, I started being a cinematographer, and really embraced that side of it.
Great.
And eventually, so I worked on Gangs of New York with Howard and with Marty. And so that's how I started working with Scorsese. And then I've been working on almost everything he's done, except when I've had big conflicts because of other movies.
Okay.
Almost everything since then, since Gangs.
But so you're like, your professional life, you're fortunate enough to be able to turn down work.
Yes, because there's actually not very many music editors. So there's a lot of work right now in New York, knock on wood. And because there's not many of us, we often do have to turn down work. And the ironic thing is that because we don't often get assistants, no one is learning with us. And I wonder who is going to take our place when we retire.
Right. If you all get on a bus and get hit, that could be bad news for the film and television industry.
Yeah.
Folks, any questions for Jen? I've been monopolizing the whole thing. Jump in and ask questions. Curtis, you look like you're leaning up to say something, yes or no?
Yeah. How do I want to say this? what do you really like look for when you're sort of when you're editing something, when you're like putting the music to something?
You mean, what do I look for in the music or the
Yeah,
visual?
yeah.
Um,
Both visually and musically, I would say.
well, it really depends on the project, and the scene and, what's needed. I mean, a lot of times when I'm cutting the music for something, I've sat with the director and the picture editor and the composer, if there is one at that point. Sometimes I come on before a composer. And so most of the time they've started working with music and something's not working with a cue or a scene. And like on a feature film, I will be doing what's called a temp score. So we go through and we decide what scenes need music, what kind of music, what ideas we're trying to do with mood. And, a lot of times the music will help the editing process for picture editing. So I try to basically create a whole score that using other movies that will be a placeholder until a composer comes on to replace it. So a lot of times I do this huge amount of work and it gets completely thrown away, which is kind of a drag, but it's also a really fun process because I could do anything with these temp scores. I could change the pitch, change the tempo, change all sorts of things about it, and because it is just a temporary thing, just to A, show a composer what the director is thinking, and B, to use it to screen it with audiences, because it's really difficult, obviously, to screen a film when there's no music in it. So, it really just depends what the scenes are and what's needed, and everything is different and is specific to each film and scene. Does that
We
answer
just
your question?
now, yeah, we just now started looking at demo reels, just kind of as examples
Uh-huh.
for these folks. And I think one of the things that we all commented on was every single one of them almost seemed driven by the music.
Yeah, I
Certainly
bet.
the editorial style and the pacing to keep things going. Otherwise, boring as all get out.
Yeah. No, music makes a big difference in everything. It's
Absolutely.
one of I think one of the most powerful mediums of film. I mean, it can change a scene so drastically, and I, you know I'm sure you've seen them, but I did something. There's a bunch of them online, but I did something for a class I was doing up here or down here, and just sort of replacing the music in a scene, and it's incredible how different it makes the intention and what you think is happening when there's no dialogue. It completely changes the storyline depending on what the music says.
Right. And also we talk about sound design as well, in that I've found that audiences will be more likely to complain, and this doesn't happen a whole lot anymore since it's all digital, but complain about not being able to hear the soundtrack as opposed to not being able to see the picture. If it's a little too dark or a little out of focus, I think they're going to be more likely to complain about sound than anything else.
Interesting. Yeah.
Any questions, folks? Ask away. Colleen?
So I'm curious how the process has changed, if at all, during the pandemic, working with like different directors on the sound design for like editing films that are in post-production.
For me, it didn't really change. Well, a little bit it did, because I do work from home a lot. But we were in the middle of mixing a film, and we got shut down because we were at a studio. But then went through like a sort of a second phase of editing. So we were all remote, and we were able to all continue working. So I basically, besides like a 2-week break, I never had a break during like the worst part of the pandemic. Then one of our engineers flew to LA, and so we had this really cool setup actually, where he was with the director and the picture editor. So there was only there was 2 mixers and then those 2. So there's only 4 people in the studio, which is all that was allowed to be. We had this remote connection where they would send us picture and audio, and then we had talkback mics, and we were remote in several different places here in New York, but seeing what they were doing and hearing it stream all day long. So we could just flip over to what they were doing, stop editing, when we wanted to check in and see where they were. And then if we saw, that they were in a scene where, like I had notes that I needed to give them, then I would just like text them or whatever and say, hey guys, let's get on the phone and talk about this for a second. So it was actually pretty cool. And there's a lot of streaming kind of apps that are out there right now that they existed before, because we would do a lot of remote sessions actually with Abbey Road for different films when sometimes we would fly over there to record the musicians, but several times we stayed in New York and we just did this thing called Source Connect in Pro Tools, where we can hear them in real time. And then we, set up a camera so we can just see them. So there's all kinds of ways that people are getting around it. And it's not the same or as good as being in person, but it lets the job get done.
So post-pandemic, do you see the industry going back to quote unquote the way it was, or do you see enough advantages because we spoke to an editor a couple of days, Alan Bell, who edited the Spider-Mans and Hunger Games and things, and his is all exactly like that. They send him a file, he does a cut, he sends it back. I'm doing that with an actor right now on a TV series. Is that the way we're going to be in the future, even post-pandemic?
I think that it was kind of going that way anyway. I think that for a lot of projects, like I said, I work at home for a lot of them. And it is, I'll edit a cue and then I'll bounce out a QuickTime and then I'll send it to the director and the picture editor and the composer if there is one. And then they'll watch it and they'll give notes. And it's because everyone's so busy too. So they're
Sure.
always in 100 directions. So it kind of works well for everybody. But there is always a point where we do have to come together. And that was the challenge when we were mixing this last film, because I mean, I can listen in my room and I have a 5.1 setup, but we were doing an Atmos mix and it's not the same, I'm hearing things, we're not in the same space. And so it's really hard to make a judgment call on the audio when you're not hearing it in the same space. So that it is kind of important to be together at that end stage, at least for sound. Picture editing is a little different because you don't have to, as long as you have a good projector, a good monitor, I think you can make those judgment calls, because the picture edit is sort of, it's an early part of the process, meaning it's not, not like VFX or something, or this is the final sound mix where you have to be in a certain space with certain lighting and certain, caliber equipment to judge something.
Good point. Folks, jump in.
I'm
Megan.
curious. I was wondering if you had any sort of like a musical background before you got into the music editing business, or did you just kind of find an interest in that because there were jobs available, or what kind of led you to do that?
No, I did. I did play French horn and piano up until I think I played the first 2 years, but I guess through my junior year at college. So I had that musical background, and it was when I got that first job. To sort of break to that side of the post editing, being able to read music and, just understand, basics in the structure of the music when you're editing it.
Folks?
Questions
up? Yep, Curtis.
Do you ever see yourself at one point wanting to actually compose a film?
No, not at all. I've never been interested in it. I mean, there is kind of, I've definitely had people make the point that I am kind of composing in ways a lot of the times with the music, because I am taking the stems, meaning like, if a composer writes, sometimes the composer will give me like whatever, like a 3-minute theme or of a character or whatever. And I get the things that make up that music. So I'll get a stem of the strings and a stem of the brass and a stem of the percussion and whatever. And I could take those different elements and I can change them up and recreate new material, new music. So it's a big part of a music editor's job, but I don't really consider it composing because I didn't write the original theme, but it is creating something new and, sometimes very new, because sometimes I'll change the tempo or the key, and it's not anything that composers like. And it's nothing that, in working on a feature film, it's nothing that you don't want to tear apart the score. And it's something that you typically do more in the temp music process that I was explaining before. But you do have to, create smaller cues and different cues out of other cues, because A, it's a time thing, and B, sometimes a director will just want something different and you just have to make it.
Good question, Curtis. Got a follow-up or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You said that you have points where you would have to change little things about this the score. Have you ever had a time when the score just sort of fit perfectly that you didn't really have to change anything at all?
I don't think so. and it's not because the score is wrong for the film. It's because when the score is done, there's still picture editing happening. So, I mean, sometimes the cues will stay exactly as they are, but for an entire film, I don't think I've ever had that happen, because as soon as the picture changes, I have to change the music to fit the new picture cut. And it's usually getting shorter. Sometimes it's getting longer, but usually it's getting shorter. And then there's also, there's times where the director just wants something different. So the stage is done where they can ask the composer to do it because it's been recorded, it's done, the music's mixed, and now we're at the final mix. And the director might decide that he or she wants something completely different. And so I have to go and find it. I have to go look at, all the other cues that I have and just create something new with those.
Does that tend to be from, well, you don't tend to work with unexperienced directors much, but that sounds like a director who doesn't know what he or she wants. Is that necessarily the case, or sometimes something just hits you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because it's such a long collaborative process to create the score, and it's such an abstract thing, I think, for a lot of directors at all levels to sort of, sometimes it's really hard to figure out, like, well, I know what I want, but what does that mean in music? And it's not an easy place to get to, often. So it's a process, and sometimes the director is not necessarily happy for a lot of the creative process of the score, and so you end up getting as far as you can, and then the final mix is sort of the last place where you can make any of those changes. And sometimes the changes are very small, and like I said, a lot of times it is just fitting it to the new picture, because it's really difficult, I think, for anyone. Like, I will work on something until basically, the producers have come in on so many movies and they're just like, pencils down, everybody, like, it's time to stop, because you just want to keep making it perfect. And even when it's in really great shape, there's most people will want to keep, finessing and, like shave a little, a couple frames there and a couple frames there, and, really small stuff that probably in the scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference to an audience. But when you're really focused on whatever part of the movie you're making, I think it's hard to just step away from it.
I've always thought it'd be kind of sad to finish a film and say there was nothing you could do better. I mean, certainly you could take pride with it, but yeah, I think we're always thinking back on how we could have improved something. Do you find have you worked with any directors who do they consider sound design like the last thing? Okay, we'll go ahead, we'll shoot it, we'll get it cut, and then I'll think about sound, and then they turn it over to you? Or are at least the ones you tend to work with, is that one of the balls in their basket that they're always trying to keep in play?
You mean as far as their involvement with it, or
what they're wanting? Yeah, and giving you guidance.
Yeah, some directors are very, very hands-on about it. I mean, Marty's the kind of director that's really focused on every one. And he listens to music when he's working on the script and the storyboards, and he's got music involved so early in the process. And he has a very clear idea of what he wants, which is really actually a joy to work with a director that's that focused. And other directors are, they're just a little, like the music it is sort of a secondary thing, not in a lower totem pole thing, but just it's not something that they just do things in stages differently. Like that's the beauty of film, is that you can make a film in a lot of different kinds of ways, and it just depends probably on the project and your work style. And so sometimes some directors will just, whatever the composer comes up with they just take it and run with it. And other directors are back and forth with the composer, and changing things constantly. So, and I'm the person that goes between the composer and the director. So it's every project is totally different,
Sure.
and each director just works very differently.
Sure. Folks, jump in. Michael, Dylan, Amy, any questions?
I have another one. So I know someone like Scorsese likes to use a lot of popular music in his films. Does he know what songs he wants at certain points? Like in The Departed, when, I don't know if you worked on that or not, but
Yeah, I did.
When they're playing Shipping Out to Boston, sort of in the beginning, when he goes through jail and he comes out and he meets his aunt, I'm pretty sure, and it just cuts. Does he know, does he go, I want this song playing and I want it to cut straight up like this?
He does make a lot of those decisions very early. Like I said, he'll be listening to music and trying things out in his mind when he's doing, very early in the process. And he, I don't know how often he has to change his mind, because, some songs are obviously more expensive than others, but I think most of the time that's, they know that the source music budget is going to be a certain amount, and especially because he starts to feed them, I'm thinking of this and this, and that's a whole other side of the music part of a film, is how much those kind of things cost, versus an original score. Yeah, he's very visual and has a lot of ideas about what he wants the music to do very early on.
Folks, don't have a lot of time left. We got 20 minutes or so left. Don't want to monopolize our time. and I've been monopolizing it. But Colleen, you going to jump in?
Yeah, I had another question. I was wondering, I know you mentioned before that when you were at Keene, you were thinking of doing cinematography. Has there been any point in your career that you've thought of sidestepping to do cinematography again, or even adding on cinematography with editing? Because I've seen some people do different things, like, you know, they're not just a editor, they can be also like a producer or something.
Yeah, for cinematography, not really. It's such a different field, and I actually, you know, when I realized just how many like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. calls there were, I was like, I don't know if that's really for me. But there's certainly people, like the producing hat is something that people tend to segue into a lot, because you get involved enough on a project and you might bring a lot more to the table than just your, you know, title of editor, music editor, sound editor, or whatever. So that's something that is sort of a natural segue for a lot of people. You know, I often, I hope at some, you know, point I might make my own, you know, documentary. That's something I always wanted to do. I haven't lost that idea, but you know, I have 3 kids, and you know, I work great, but it's also doesn't leave a lot of time for exploring much else at this point in my life. You know, I have 2 kids away at college and 1 in high school, so it might be something that I try to explore when we're empty nesters. Although we just got a puppy, so that kind of like ruins all that free time too.
I was gonna piggyback on Colleen's comment, and you've started talking about it, Jen. Is your schedule, like, are you given an assignment and you have a deadline, and so your schedule is fairly malleable given your role as parent and all, and now puppy mom, or you know, what's your schedule like?
Basically, when you start a job, they take over your life, and you have no life except your job. And you know, I get home when I'm in the city, when I'm working at home, I break and have dinner with the family. But then I usually come back to work, and our hours are pretty long. It depends on the project, but usually it's sort of a 9 to 9 kind of thing. And then if you're working in the city, then it takes an hour to get home. So, you know, a lot of times I'll get home at 10 or 11 at night, and you know, the kids are asleep, and it's a juggle. I have my husband is a wonderful, supportive partner who has like taken up, you know, a lot of the logistics of parenting, which is what made it work for me. So he has a more a regular job, quote unquote, where so he gets home at a more normal time. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty standard in this industry that it's just very time consuming and all consuming, but it's also really fun. So it's not, you know, you're not balancing, you know, checkbooks or whatever for hours and hours. You're making music, or you're, you know, doing something visual or with audio. And so it's not torture, but it is hard to juggle other things for sure.
If you don't mind my asking, are the kids following in mom's footsteps or not?
No, they were like, I don't want to work that many hours. And so they went so far in the other direction. Nobody's interested in film.
Right. Yep, I have the same situation.
Nope.
Folks jumping in, asking questions.
I have a question. You
Yep.
talked a little bit about moving to New York after working with Florentine Films, and I was curious how you kind of made the jump from Florentine to New York. Were you working any jobs for Florentine in New York, or did you just find opportunities over there that allowed you to move there?
I think I worked on a documentary. It wasn't a Ken Burns documentary though. It was I can't even remember what it was, to be honest, at this point. But it was through one of the people that I worked with at Florentine. So she was doing another project and she brought me on as an assistant. And then, again, like just meeting people, eventually I found other work. And then I did work on a bunch of other Florentine projects after I had moved down there. And that's when they started to do more of them down there, at least the sound. So it was really, it was, I don't think I had a job when I went down. I think I just went down there knowing that some of my coworkers that I had met up in New Hampshire knew that at some point they were going to have work, and they said, we will hire you if you move down. So I just went and crashed with a friend who was living down there, and eventually started to make enough money that I could actually get an apartment and, do that whole process.
If you could speak into the ear of that Jennifer Dunnington at that time, would you say that was crazy or not?
No, it
Go
felt
in.
very safe because I
Okay.
had that connection initially. So
Okay.
I knew that I was getting some kind of work. And because I was crashing with a friend, I didn't have any overhead really.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? Folks, keep jumping in. If you don't mind my asking, it had to have affected you either as a person or whatever. 9/11. What was it like? Did it impact you?
Yeah. I mean, we were living in Inwood, which is a very northern part of Manhattan. And my twins were about 10 months old. And I was packing my bags to go to New Zealand to work on Lord of the Rings. And 9/11 happened. And so the flight got canceled. We processed that horrific time, smelling the smoke and seeing the clouds. And it was just a bizarre, awful time watching the news constantly. And anyway, it was, we were the first flight to go out actually after they started to fly again.
Really?
I mean, one of the first flights.
Right.
And it was actually, I don't know, we felt kind of guilty leaving, but it was also, I don't know, we were just on this beautiful island working on this crazy movie. And my husband went and we brought my kids. And so he took his paternity leave. And so we spent 2 months there. I was working around the clock, but he and the girls were in this beautiful, clean, amazing country. And we would just watch the news, which was, they would have these daily things about 9/11, but mostly it was New Zealand news. It was like life was going on in a normal way. And everyone we knew here was just not having that experience at all. So it was a bizarre time on many levels.
Certainly. Folks, we got a few more minutes left to prod. Curtis, you going to jump in? I'll let you and Jen go into a breakout room, and you can. No, you got good questions. Go ahead.
So you've worked on a couple documentaries. I'm looking at IMDb right now, so I know. You worked on the George Harrison, the Living in the Material World documentary. What do you feel like the difference between working on something like that and more faster paced, like Wolf of Wall Street like film?
Those documentaries specifically, because they are music documentaries, there's a lot that is, dealing with archival footage is much different. A lot of times the audio is, there's speed issues with it. So those have to be addressed, especially if there's on camera singing. So you have to deal with a lot more technically, solving problems. And then because it's, it is all about the music, it is more challenging in a way to to edit those songs because they're very featured and because they're lyrics. And so it's harder to cut something that has lyrics than it is score, just by nature of, what you can get away with more when there's no lyrics to tie into. And it does, you don't have it. The lyrics have to still make sense. And especially with songs that everybody knows, it's hard to make a cut when, it'll throw everybody off who's listening to it because they all know the song so well. So it is a different set of challenges because of that. And Wolf of Wall Street had a lot of songs in it, but they're, maybe not as well known, or, you're just taking a section of it. So it's not the entire song, or it's not featured quite as much, or it's featured in a different kind of a way.
Okay, good question, Curtis. Folks, I've always got questions.
So
mentioned-
everybody here is a film major?
Yep. You want to ask, talk to them, ask them questions, what they're interested in, or not.
Yeah. Well, do you focus on something specific, or is it just like as a general film degree? Like, I don't know how much it's changed since I was there.
We've got, again, I think when you were here, it was part of theater, speech, and film.
Yeah.
And a few years, about 4 or 5 years after I got here in '94, we were able to branch off into its own freestanding degree. When we became the film program, you had to choose a path, either critical studies or production. I'd say about 95% of our quote unquote majors follow production, but the critical studies faculty serve the rest of the college for ISPs, electives, things like that. So the critical studies folks actually serve more students.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say we probably have about 250 majors right now, which is up quite a bit from when I first got here. Within production, you graduate with a BA in production, but the areas we tend to focus on, I'm emphasizing cinematography, obviously, and editing. We're looking to do a screenwriting option. And so, we're trying to cover as many of our bases as we can. My push has always been, and I come from I come from the West Coast, mainstream Hollywood, and my emphasis has always been getting these folks work when they graduate. And so teaching them some kind of a skill that they can turn into, hopefully, and that's what career development, this class is all about. Although I jokingly say they have to convincingly ask me if I want fries with that or want it in a pump or a loafer before they graduate. Otherwise, they can't graduate.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned an interest in documentary. If and when you become, you're free enough and have the finances enough to fund your own project, what interests you?
Well, I don't know if I should tell you, because then you might.
No, we can swipe it. That's fair. If you don't want to, we'll all sign NDAs.
No, I'm kidding. There's this woman who has always fascinated me. Her name's Isabella Bird, and she was an English. It was in the mid 1800s. She came to the West in the Rocky Mountains and traveled around, and she was just an amazing traveler who she was riding horseback in the middle of winter by herself, and she wrote these diaries. And I think someone actually purchased the rights already but never made anything with it. And anyway, I wanted to do a documentary about her since, I don't know, for like 30 years, I think. So that's what I hope to do someday.
Okay. Sounds like some interesting travel, certainly as well.
Yeah.
Folks, any concluding questions for our guest before we let her go? Nothing there.
Hey, Tom, it's Mark.
Yep.
I guess if I've learned anything in this series is that you should be brave and jump in, because you never know where it might lead to. Is that right?
You asking me or asking Jen?
Well, I'm giving myself permission to ask a question. Let's put it
Absolutely.
that way.
No, absolutely.
So Jennifer, I'm a big fan of Scorsese's Last Waltz, and I know that you didn't work on it,
Mm-mm.
but I was wondering if there's anything over time that you could share about it, or maybe it's had pieces and other things that Marty has shared with you or referred to. I just out of curiosity, just wondering if it leads us anywhere.
I mean, nothing. What do you mean? Like that? If anything that we've used anything from The Last Waltz in other movies?
Either that or just plain stories. You know, if there's something that is maybe an interesting story that.
Of that movie in particular, I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Is there something that, I mean, that was kind of a big move in terms of doing that musical rockumentary. Well, all right, I guess I can't ask the question. Is there one he hasn't done that we should be expecting at some point?
For another music documentary?
Yeah.
Rockumentary?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's always got so many projects in the works. He is doing another music one. I should know what it is because I'm supposed to work on it and I can't remember. I can't remember who it is. I'm sorry.
Mark, I don't know if you've seen Martin Scorsese's Masterclass, but he did a masterclass and they're pretty fascinating. He's got some great stories.
Mhm.
And some great information for nascent filmmakers as well. I'll pass that along to you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I watched some of that. It was interesting.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah.
Jen, any other words of advice for our folks getting out into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, you know, just speaking from the post side, the editorial side, to just learn the equipment really well as you can. I mean, I don't know what do you guys have there at Keene State for Avids or Pro Tools, or what do you have?
They usually start with Adobe Premiere and Avid. I'm a big media composer guy, and I'm having to fight the department to retain it because the license is a little expensive.
Mhm.
And so I'm hoping to, every editor we've talked to has said you've got to learn Avid, so I'm hoping to wise the department up to keep it.
Mhm.
Pro Tools certainly in our advanced sound design suites, so learning that.
Mhm.
And then relative to other kinds of post-production, I teach a visual effects class that we get into, you know, all sorts of special effects gear.
Right.
We basically emphasize, you know, Premiere, as I'm certainly not telling you anything you don't know. Premiere is kind of the prosumer brand,
Mhm.
and then we used to work on Final Cut quite a bit, and have since sort of dropped that down to staying with Premiere and then Media Composer.
Yeah.
And again, Media Composer, I think, has kind of dominated the West Coast. So, but we've been told by our picture editors who have chimed in with us that I always used to think, because they're so similar, and you as an editor know this, you push one button here and you push a different button on a different one. Big deal.
Yeah.
But I've been told that it's not sufficient to say you know Avid and then go and learn it. That employers these days really want you to be fluent in both.
Right.
So I feel it's important that our editors, our sound designers really know that type of software when they
Yeah.
get out so they can work right into it.
Yeah. And that was what I was going to say, is that it is, I think, the most important thing. So when, you know, when I hire an assistant, I want someone who knows the Pro Tools inside and out so that I don't have to troubleshoot. So that if something goes wrong, then an assistant can troubleshoot and figure it out and get us up and running, you know, quickly. So there's so much to learn. And because you can rent it on your own, and You know, so there's lots of opportunities besides just doing, you know, working in the lab. I don't know what is available for the students, if there's a lab they have to go to, or like, what do they do when it's virtual? How do they access that stuff?
You actually can. We've got beginning and advanced labs that are the beginning lab is basically Premiere and Avid, and actually any of the labs can be accessed remotely through, I forget what the name of the software is.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but again, the thing that I try to emphasize is student discount on the software itself. You can get the Adobe Suite for, I think it's $20 a month. Avid is $10 a month.
Yeah.
So there's really, if you're interested in sound design, if you're interested in editing, there's really no reason not to own it yourself, with the exception of the kind of, especially for video, as you know, the processing power demand. You got to have a really beefy system.
Right.
But yeah, I think the important thing that we try to emphasize is expose them to the kinds of gear and software they're going to be experiencing when they get out. Because like you say, if you're going to hire Megan, it's not enough for Megan to say, oh yeah, I'll go learn it. You need to know that Colleen knows it right now.
Right. Yeah. And the best way to learn it, I think, is to just make, you know, projects with other students. And because it's different than if you work with other people, it's different than if you're making your own thing on your own time. If you have deadlines with other people, then you learn how you have to be efficient, and you have to make, you know, decisions and commit to things, and you know, how differently you will work or come to a conclusion with something creatively when you have a deadline and you're not where you want it to be, but you have to present something. And so sometimes when you're forced on those deadlines, you actually come up with things that you know, maybe hadn't thought of. But it also gets you trained to work faster. So it is something that people will note if you are if it takes you a long time to do something, because most projects don't allow that kind of time. It's pretty, everything is so fast paced now, and the budgets are smaller, the schedules are smaller. And I mean, it depends on the film, like the big features. Sometimes I'm on for the last film I was just on for a year. And a couple of films before that was a year, but those are mostly the musicals. They're just massive jobs with tons and tons of music editing. So most of them, you know, it's anywhere from 3 months to, you know, 9 months, depending on the project. But there's still, you know, there's always these periods, and even those films that are a much longer schedule, there's always these periods where you have to, and you know, half the time you'll be on the mix stage within a room full of people, including directors, producers, you know, and everybody's listening to what you're doing, and you have to make a really fast decision on how to fix something or change something. And so anytime you can get involved as a student on other people's projects and with deadlines, and you know, there's a film festival, and there's you know, anywhere you can submit this work that gets you on those deadlines is great practice for what's in store for later.
Great. If you don't have any salacious stories about Marty to entertain Mark, I'll finish with one question. You talk about being on projects for a year. As an artist, how do you maintain that passion?
I guess there's always, I don't know, you get to the end of anything and you're ready to never do, you're ready to quit the business entirely. And then I always say it's like childbirth, like, you know, a month will go by and then you'll be so, you know, sentimental about the thought of it. And then you're excited to do, I mean, that's why I love the way everything is freelance. Like I can't imagine doing the same job day in and day out, because you put in so much energy and creativity and love into these projects, and you start to, it's not just about that it's a job, it's just you're creating something and you're helping to create it. And so you get very involved emotionally, and on many different levels. So it is kind of like birthing a child, and then you send it out into the world, and then it's on its own, and then you start the next one, and it's totally different, and it's got a new set of problems and a new set of challenges, and I love that. I love that every job is something new, and the music is completely different. And I just went from a musical, and now I'm working with hip hop, and it's just I love the change that always comes with each new film.
Great. Folks, last chance. If nothing, Jen, thank you so much for spending your evening with us here. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
For everybody who's out there watching, thank you once again for spending an hour with us and our successful grad, Jennifer Dunnington. We'll be speaking with yet another successful grad, Joshua LeBlanc, who is out on the West Coast this time. And we will hope to see you next week. I'd like to thank Misty Kennedy and Mark Gempler for helping produce all of this. And from Keene State College and the film program, I'm Tom Cook. See you next week.